Hey there, my name is Rachael and welcome to the Magdala podcast. We at Magdala know from experience that pornography, masturbation, and other sexual addictions are not just a guy problem. The need for women to be accompanied in a journey towards healing from addiction has gone sorely unmet, and that's why we're here. Magdala exists as a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom alongside each other from sexual addiction. Our goal is to supply you with support, community, and accountability. Here on the podcast, you'll find everything from testimonies to practical advice to dialogue about how to heal and live fully as a Catholic woman. Wherever you are in your journey, know that you're not alone, and we welcome you to this table. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Magdala podcast. I was about to say what episode number it was, and then I realized I have no idea. I have no idea which episode this is. It's the episode of this week. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit different. I have Shelby with me, who's our associate director of content. So she oversees our blog, basically rewrites every blog post we do to make sure it sounds good. But she also is known in Magdala as the person with the quickest turnaround. So welcome, Shelby, with the quickest turnaround. But we've been getting, or at least I know I did, and then it came up kind of as a discussion between the team, but we kept on hearing about this movie called Redeeming Love. And I heard of the book several years ago, like way back, because my mom read it, and always avoided it just because I heard it contained, some pretty sexual themes, so I decided not to pursue that for obvious reasons. But the movie came out, I guess a couple months ago, maybe? Yeah, something right. Like that. Yeah, it's came out pretty recently. So Shelby and I decided to take the plunge and watch it and see what our response would be in answer to women's questions. So this is not going to be an easy one because right after we watched it, a motorcycle's driving past. Thank you, Nashville, Tennessee. Right after watching it, we messaged and we were like, oof, this is going to be super conflicting. But yeah, tell me, Shelby, after watching, what was your first emotion? What was your reaction?
Yeah, so I cried. First of all, I was sobbing by the end of the movie, and it was a weird mix of, heartbroken over everything I just witnessed, but also heartbroken that the themes and the messaging in that movie I could not recommend to girls who I know are struggling with sexual sin. They just completely misused the themes, and they portrayed them in a way that is not something that is good and reflective of, the healing power that hearing certain things can have on someone with sexual, and especially as someone who comes from a background of, abusive relationships and, relationships abuse. I basically watched as this main character confronted every fear that I personally have had about a man loving me.
Yeah.
But by the time the movie was ended, I was heartbroken because I knew to recommend this movie or even the story to any of my girls because of just the decisions they made producing and creating.
Yeah, I completely agree. Watching, for our listeners who don't understand or haven't seen the plot or haven't seen the movie and therefore don't understand the plot or read the book. The movie is an interpretation of the story of Hosea from the Bible, and the main character is a prostitute who's sold into prostitution as a child and then is rescued by a man named Michael. And he marries her, and she kind of has a really hard time acclimating to the marriage and turns back to her old life more than once. And there's a whole journey there. We recommend, if you don't like spoilers, probably don't keep listening to this episode. However, I felt the same way. At the end, I cried several times throughout the movie, sometimes just at the depiction of the horror and the evil of what this woman was going through. Mm-hmm. But I cried at the end also for the same reason, where I was like, ugh, this could have been done so much better. And I heard the book does kind of unpack things a little bit more. So we can't speak to the book because neither of us have read it. You haven't read it, correct?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so we're not going to speak to the book specifically. We're going to kind of treat them as two different works here. But yeah, the character of Michael, we need to talk about him because he was fabulous. He was great.
Amazing.
Right? He was the Christ figure of the movie. But I felt like even his goodness was overshadowed by basically every other male depiction in the movie. Like, every other guy kind of sucks. Like, or like really, really sucks. Like, really sucks. So I felt like even the screen time given to the redemptive aspects of the film, like, were very minimal compared to the screen time given to evil. And that kind of bothered me too, because I was like, isn't the point of this supposed to be something healing and redemptive and not just opening the Pandora's box of prostitution and sexual abuse? And because that should be portrayed. But if your focus is supposed to be on healing and redemption, shouldn't more screen time be given to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you're right. It wasn't just, the evil wasn't just found in the sexual sin and the use and everything. It was also in all the death. There is an insane amount of death and just
murder.
A basic disregard for human life.
Yeah.
And for souls and corruption and just everything. So you're right. The bad ultimately outweighed the good in terms of screen time. And although they ended with a beautiful resolution,
right,
you still felt heavy.
Yeah, that's a good word. I felt super heavy. I felt heavy for about 24 hours afterward. I was like, oh, like, I just, I needed like a nap later that day. I was like, I can't, because obviously you and I talked about, it's been compared, and the comparison came to mind for me as well. It's been compared to Unplanned, where they depict abortion, right? Which I can't remember if Unplanned. I know there's the scene at the very beginning, but I can't remember if they depict it again. But it's, like we do need to have an understanding of evil, right? Like we need to be exposed to the reality of evil in our world, the evil that other people are facing, the evil that we're supposed to face off with as brothers and sisters in Christ. So the problem wasn't having prostitution or sexual abuse or death as part of the storyline, or abortion as part of the storyline. I think the problem is when that becomes the focus, almost for like a sake of twisted entertainment. That's how it started to feel to me, is when this never stopped, this abuse, prostitution, distorted sexuality, when that did not stop until literally the last 5 to 10 minutes of the movie. I was like, this is starting to this is starting to just feel like I'm supposed to be entertained by this. Like, this is the point of the movie. Right. But even deeper than that, the biggest problem that we're here to address is there are two sex scenes. I was like, not one, but two. Between the two main characters after they are married. And again, this is a really, really good, upright Christian man who rescues this prostitute and is trying to love her. But the movie depicts like sexual acts to completion. I think they obscure nudity. I skipped a scene Shelby did not, so Shelby can speak into this better. But what was your reaction to those scenes, Shelby? And do you think they're justified or not as part of the plot?
Yeah. So I actually thought that they ruined the movie. And that's a big statement to make because it was about 2 hours long, and these things probably last, I don't know, like 3 to 5 minutes each.
Oof.
But they tried to make them integral to the plot. And when that becomes a problem, Rachel's right. They showed too much. It's almost like directors and the producers and the writers sat down and they were like, okay, we don't want to show any nudity because that would clearly be bad, but why don't we just, show everything else? All the sounds, all of the expressions, like the position of their bodies, just everything is there.
Yeah.
And we're not dumb. We know what's happening. And even though they're within the marital bond, still it's something intimate and something that we should not be seeing.
Yeah.
Like I could recognize that these two individuals are in a marriage and they love each other, and they have this sacred bond, but even knowing all of that, I'm watching a scene and
Yeah.
I felt uncomfortable.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it felt a little different than like some one night stand portrayed on a screen. It's still something private, and it's something my eyes should not be seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was at dinner a couple weeks or a week ago with a couple friends, and we were talking about this movie, and this was one of the things that motivated me to actually just finally watch it so I could have some thoughts. But they were like, one person said, like, I've never seen porn, but this is different. And I was like, well, I have, and lots of it. And let me tell you what, this scene sounds like something I would look up readily when I needed an easy place to go. Like,
yeah.
And so I think people think because it's in a film, because it's this, because it's between a married couple, like porn doesn't discriminate. Porn
Right.
uses everyone. It uses every kind of relationship. It does not care. Like, it does not care. And when you're using it, you don't care. And as a woman, especially, things like, audio, like noises, like psychologically, we are incredibly stimulated by audio. That's why, like, some of our women are solely addicted to audio pornography. But further, the relationship is actually kind of an appealing thing for women too. I was reading a study recently that was talking about how these psychologists did a test group with men and women and showed them pornography. Obviously, these studies like have their ethical issues, but the results are fascinating. Where the men are visually stimulated, right? But they attribute their stimulation or their sexual arousal to the attractiveness of the people involved in the scene, whereas women are also visually stimulated, but they're stimulated by their ability to imagine themselves as the woman in the scene. That's what they said. And I was like, holy cow, that's a huge insight into the difference between men and women, right? Is that so actually a sex scene that's integrated within a plot that is supposed to make us feel emotional and invested, that's actually far more dangerous than an isolated pornographic sex scene that you could find on Pornhub, right? For a lot of women. Some women, it's the other way around. But that's what concerns me, is that when these sort of things are widely accepted, people aren't taking into account the psyche of women. And I think there's not a lot of, female-specific addiction studies out there. So I think a lot of people aren't exposed to this kind of knowledge. But that's what concerns me chiefly, is like we're not taking into account the psyche of women and what the definition of pornography is. And then also like how things like this can actually be more harmful and more accessible in the long run for females who are addicted. But on top of that, so as somebody who relates to storylines of abuse and trauma, how did you feel about the depiction of trauma in this movie? Like, did it feel like resolved to you? Or like, I mean, you had some interesting thoughts when we spoke before about just like actors in trauma, and I'd love for you to share those.
Yeah. So, to answer your first question, the depictions of trauma, I mean, in terms of what she was going through, it was absolutely like, they displayed the whole aspect of it very well. She has dreams about her abuser, like finding her after years and years, things like, things that maybe she thinks are resolved, but still like lay in her subconscious, and the total disregard for human dignity and just being able to use people when you come and go, like that was all showed pretty accurately as far as like my experiences go. However, what I was talking to Rachael about when we were discussing even the idea of this movie, like before we even saw it, I mean, I have a huge problem with directors and producers asking these to portray these abusive, trauma-filled scenes. You know, like they're acting, they're putting themselves in the character shoes, they're studying a script, they're trying to think through, okay, well, if this was happening to me, what would my reaction be?
Right.
And you're asking them to put themselves in trauma. Like, that's a huge deal, you know, just, I mean, obviously, their problem was just like asking an actor to do a sex scene with someone else. But when you're asking them to go through trauma, like psychological damage,
Yeah.
and asking them to act like a person who has been abused for years and years and years, that doesn't seem fair at all to the person who's supposed to just like finish this project in a few months and then walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think on top of that too, they had children involved, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I completely agree with like adults, but at least adults can consent to a role, and they have like, you know, they have reason, they have experiences. I mean, we just have more of a bandwidth to process these things, but like there were children involved in some of these abusive scenes. And, you know, to the director's credit, he did more implying with children rather than more explicit portrayals. But still, like, do the children know the plot of the movie? Like, do they know what their character's going through? There's one scene where you see a man go into a room and then you hear two girls screaming. Like that was one where I actually almost vomited. Like I was like,
and not just screaming like the director's telling them, oh, like pretend like you're scared about something.
Right.
They're like yelling, get away from me.
Yeah.
Like, get off of me.
Yeah.
They're actually screaming.
Yeah.
Like words that are directly implied to what is supposed to be happening.
To violation, right? And it's like looking at the actors, I'd assume they're anywhere from like 8 to 11 or 12. Like that's my guess. Yeah. Like older elementary school, younger middle school is my guess, tops.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they've ever been through a violating experience, which way too many children have, you're asking them to relive, like you've pointed out. Or if they've never been through that kind of experience, you're exposing their innocence to an experience that so far they've been protected from, and aren't we supposed to keep protecting that? You know? So I think there's a huge difference between asking adult actors to step into trauma, which is so problematic, like you really intelligently pointed out, but then asking children to step into it too. And that was what was so like weird about the movie, is you're like, could we have done without some of this? Like, you know, could abuse and prostitution and these horrible things that we do need to know about and we need to be exposed to in order to minister to people and to love people and to root out these evils in our everyday and in our culture. But like we need that exposure, but could we have done without some of the you know, I guess the repeated exposure to it? Like is a couple times enough? Or could we have seen the redemptive aspect of marriage and the unity that sex and marriage can offer, especially somebody who has experienced abuse? Like, can we see the union of that without explicit sexual acts? Like, I feel like we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was watching it, and after the sex scenes, I saw how they tried to tie it in. I'm like, okay, they could have made 5 different decisions that it wouldn't have shown the sex scene, but you could have gotten the point across that she's starting to realize that this is different than her abuse in the past.
Right.
Like, and even with the little kids, like, they didn't even, like, there's so many different decisions that they could have made to imply more. You know, this is an audience of adults. Like, again, we're not dumb. We know what's happening. You don't need to send these into a room and scream these horrible phrases. We can just, like, maybe you just see him into a room and you see like a little girl standing there. Like, that would be enough. Right. Just to like see the innocence in front of you. That would be enough. You do not need to ask these little girls to be put through this trauma.
Agreed. And then on top of it, like you and I were talking about the following the sex scene, because when I skipped, this is exactly the part that I skipped to, and it was funny that it came up with you, is like it shows the couple like in bed holding hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how for her, like, that's never happened. That level of like unity and peace after having sex, that's never happened.
Yeah.
But for me watching that, I was like, I feel like, you know, you could have seen some beautiful and tender things leading up, right? I'm not disturbed by that, the portrayal of that between married couples in movies. Like, I'm thinking of a movie I watched several years ago called Cinderella Man. Like, they showed, it's a Russell Crowe movie. They showed a lot of really tender, beautiful, affectionate moments between a married couple and like flirting and different things. And it's like, I think that's healthy to portray that on screen, obviously in a way that's like still prudent, but it's like, couldn't we have seen that and then like them holding hands afterward and her still experiencing that unity? Like, I feel like that would have been just as powerful. Maybe that's me being like protective, but I feel like that's the case. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I had the exact same thought. 'Cause it was, I mean, I actually think they had that scene in the middle of the sex scene.
Oh, did it?
It was
Okay.
like, yeah, it was just when they like, it was just when they got to the bed. And she like looks over and sees that. And
Oh,
then
okay.
like it resumes. But I was like, that was a split moment where I was like, okay, yeah, like, can I just keep this? You know,
Yeah,
like, can I
right?
just keep this like 10 seconds right here and then
Mm-hmm.
like cut to black because I don't need to see the rest of it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, we were on Amazon Prime, so I was like, boop, boop, like trying to skip around. Where I
Yep.
was like, where can I land where I'm not going to have to see something I don't want to see? So, I mean, maybe I did skip to the middle, who knows? Um, but yeah, I mean, I agree. It's like, we could have had something like that. Because, I mean, one of the main problems, other than not understanding the female psyche and how we work when it comes to sexual content, is, I think the movie spends, we were talking about this before, but the movie spends a lot of time on crimes and like, I mean, horrific crimes against sexuality and sins against sexuality, like willingly chosen sins on the part of some people in the film.
Yeah.
It spends a lot of time emphasizing the evil of that, but like without understanding that with like without allowing sex to become, again, behind closed doors, become something sacred and beautiful that's only experienced between spouses,
Yeah.
like in the sacrament of marriage. Without allowing it to become that again, these crimes and sins will just continue. Like,
Right.
so it's hard to be exposed to that level of evil and call it evil and then also have the same content in a movie that still kind of upholds a narrative that it's okay to portray these things publicly.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they're married, I don't know, like some people try to use that as justification. When I was in conversation with them, I'm like, actually, that kind of disturbs me more. Like, it disturbs me more that we're content to watch a married couple do this. Like, would you want to watch your married friends do this in real life? No.
No.
You wouldn't.
I wouldn't.
No, seriously. Like, it's like, ask yourself
Yeah.
that question. Why are you, then why are you okay watching it in a story? Like, what?
Yeah.
And yeah, you and I talked beforehand, like you watched it for the sake of this review, and yeah, you're the braver one of the two of us. But I think that question is worth asking, is like, what's our line? Like, if we're okay watching it between married couples and a film, but like we would never do it in real life, like what does that say about us? But then also, like, what is our line? If we make an exception that we can portray explicit sexual acts, and then when I say explicit, I'm not talking about like nudity or does it show genitals. I'm not talking about the graphic level. I'm talking about like, does it explicitly portray a sexual act? Yes. Shows them having intercourse to completion. So that's about as explicit as it gets. But in that regard. But it's like, yeah, I don't know, if we make an exception to portray that, you know, where does that end? Like, shouldn't our line be just like, no, this just shouldn't be portrayed? Like, or if it is portrayed, it should be just implied, again, behind closed doors. So I don't know. That's my, like, when I walk away, that's the question that I want to be asking the people who are viewing this movie, is like, what is your line? Like, because where do the exceptions end, you know, if we make an exception here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just for me personally, when I was watching it, you know, like, I also try to think of, you know, like, we see people kiss.
Sure.
Like, we see people kiss in daily life, and every time we go to a wedding, they kiss at the end. Like
Right.
kissing is the basis of like physical intimacy,
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But when something is pointed towards an end, especially when it comes to intimacy,
Yeah.
pretty quickly.
Right.
Like you can tell.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about like a room of adults, like
Yeah.
there's not going to be anyone watching this who is unsure of what they're doing.
Right.
So for me, just again, like I said, I knew that they were married. I knew that this was, not out of lust, but out of love.
Sure.
And yet I still like squirmed in my seat. I still wanted to play because when just subconsciously, even when you're not supposed to be looking at something, you feel uncomfortable. And I don't care what that thing is, when you see something private,
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, our conscience, our conscience tells us something. And one girl I was speaking to a couple weeks ago about it, who asked me for my thoughts, she said the same thing. She was like, I mean, I felt something watching those scenes. Like if that tells you anything, I was like, yeah. And naturally you should. Like that makes a lot of sense. I don't think there's any shame in that you did, because, it can be purpose towards
what
that.
they were.
Yeah, that's what they were. You have a normal body. Good job.
Yeah.
But I just, yeah. I don't know. In other discussions, somebody just said like I may have already said this, but the line of like, I've never seen porn, but this is different. And I just responded with like, and this person knows my job. They know about Magdala. But I just looked at them and I was like, well, I have seen porn. And to be completely honest, like I would have pulled this up time and time again. I may have said that at the beginning of this episode, but like that bears repeating, is that
it's worth saying again.
Yeah, like I as somebody who has experienced this and has walked dozens of women through this, scenes like this are detrimental to recovery. And people justifying them are detrimental to recovery. And our friends walking us into movie theaters to see this kind of crap, that's detrimental to recovery. And it being blanketed, and not blanketed, because there are good elements to this movie, but like it being kind of the wolf in sheep's clothing a little bit, that's detrimental to people's recovery from sexual sin. So I don't know. I think, again, I get protective, like the mama bear instincts over our girls, but like this really bothered me.
Definitely. And I think this is something that I know you mentioned earlier, and I think it's worth circling back to. Like how the female brain is more apt to view pornography or whatever they're using pleasure as stepping into it and like kind of trying to picture themselves there.
Yeah.
This makes it so much more heartbreaking for me because, like we've talked about, there are some very good themes in this movie, especially with Michael, the main character.
Yeah.
He is so good to this main character girl. Her name throughout it is Angel, but that's revealed that her real name is Sarah. He's so good to Sarah, and he forgives her time and time again. He just loves her unconditionally. And by the end, you get a great resolution of, she finally is able to the love that he has given her, and they end up living a happy life together. But because these sex scenes are in here, I cannot recommend this movie or even the story to any of my girls, even though I know that they'll say that they took out the sex scenes and the actual trauma that you're watching is like more implied, and it's let's say it's a healthy thing that we're able to like recommend to our girls. Imagine them watching this and hearing Michael talks to Sarah, hearing how much love he pours out on her, and imagine them putting themselves in her position and actually thinking like, I am loved. I can be loved despite of what I've done. Like even just like Michael is clearly a Christ figure, just hearing and like seeing it on the screen that, yeah, you can be redeemed. You are redeemed, even though you've done these things in the past. But we can't do that.
I know.
They made this movie. They made it wrong, you know?
They did.
There's just like, there's no way around it. They made bad decisions and made it wrong. And, you know, it's kind of ruined.
Completely.
And it's unfortunate.
Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously Shelby's getting at the fact that, like, yeah, Magdala as an organization in good conscience cannot recommend this movie. Do not take this podcast episode as an endorsement of the movie. It's the opposite. Just in case we were making that clear. But another reason why I feel like we can't, on top of like what you just pointed out, is that, I mean, despite the fact that in the end she receives love, she receives her identity back, like all of this beautiful stuff, like there's still, you know, we can't recommend it because of problematic content. On top of that, and this is what we try not to do in Magdala, it seems like it kind of hinges her redemption on sex.
Yeah.
Right? Like her redemption from sexual trauma, which I didn't feel like was totally, like her recovery from it didn't seem totally realistically portrayed. It's like this woman was sold into prostitution as a child. I think it would take her years before she could have a healthy sexual relationship. And then in modern times, it would probably take psychological intervention for her to do so. But in her time, because it's a historical story, it would probably, you know, take a lot more spiritual intervention. But yeah, I think it would take time. And I don't think they give total credence to what that experience is like. But it's still like sex is at the core of the sin in the movie, and it's at the core of the redemption in the movie. It's like, and the sex scenes, I think, are the thing that do that. And like you're pointing out, if they were removed, it's like the love of God and Michael's love that attribute to her redemption, and chiefly the love of God, but Michael's love is secondary. Not sex and like a sexual relationship. Because our redemption from sexual sin is not when we get married to a really nice guy and can have a beautiful sexual relationship with him. Like that can be a part of our walk with God through our own like redemptive story, right? But like we have too many women in our organization where that is their hope, like instead of in Jesus Christ. Like, you know, their hope is in one day experiencing healing in a marriage. It's like, no, your healing is now. Like the invitation to heal is now. Jesus wants to reach out to you and love you and give you your identity back and your sexuality back now. And so I had that problem too, where I was like, this isn't it. Like we don't find our end in happy sexual relationships. So that can be such a beautiful fruit of God's healing, and that can be a tool of God's healing. It's not where it's like found, if that makes sense. As somebody who is married after a history of sexual sin, that one bothered me, where I was like, nah, I did my work, man. Like this was not like, but again, it's a beautiful tool of God. It's like, no, my redemption's in Jesus. And I don't know, I just feel like that's where we try to focus as an organization. So that's another reason why I can't recommend it. I don't know, doesn't ultimately place the emphasis back where it belongs.
Right. Yeah, because really there's just that one moment, you know, and it's okay for, you know, God often works through the people around our lives and in our lives. And like it was clearly Michael's love, his forgiveness that ultimately led her to rekindle a relationship with God. But we saw it for like 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of a 2-hour movie, you know, like she asked God, he delivered. And then she like just goes and reunites with Michael, and it's like that's the end. Like I don't think she mentions God at all, or like rekindling her relationship with her faith or anything it's in like that last
moment.
Scene. Yeah. So that's a huge overstep.
Yeah, completely. I don't know. I think maybe that's my biggest issue with it. I have several. And I keep on saying my biggest issue with this movie is, but maybe that's it. And it's like, this isn't actually, redemption's impossible without Christ. And I felt like the credit wasn't given to him.
No.
As we wind down, Because I feel like we've covered, like,
rambled on
where most of our notes. Like, y'all, after watching this movie, Shelby was like, I'm just sending you a video. I'm sending you a video of my thoughts.
And that video was 13 minutes long.
It was great. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. I watched it like twice. But as we wind down, we're talking about a story that doesn't, help women heal like authentically, or that we can't recommend as a healing resource, I guess is a better way to put that. Do you have a book or a movie that meant a lot to you that you felt that you feel you can recommend for the path towards healing? I think the book of Hosea, just read it. Like, read the actual book of Hosea.
That was my first thing. Go to the Bible. There's this book that I am reading with my girls that really just breaks down the healing of sexual sin, and a sexual sin of all kinds too. It's like it approaches walks of life. It's called Be Restored. And I'm sure if you've been doing your research in this, you've probably stumbled across this book.
Yeah, we're doing it with our patrons right now. Did you know that? We're doing the study.
Yeah.
It's so awesome.
Yep. So I cannot recommend the book enough. It is so hard.
Good. Yeah.
It is real. It is vulnerable. But oh my goodness. Like, I just ask you to take the plunge and, dedicate. It doesn't have to be longer than 5 minutes, because honestly, every chapter opens up like 5 new wounds in your heart that God just wants to radically heal. So just be patient with yourself, but go to the Bible, to resources like that are actually looking after your well-being and looking after the stable relationship with Christ. Because ultimately, if we don't have relationship with Christ, then true healing is not going to be really found.
Absolutely. I love Be Restored, and that's by Dr. Bob Schutz. He's a trusted Catholic psychologist. I'd shout his stuff from the rooftops. He's amazing. One for me that was like oddly healing just for my own heart, kind of related to sexual sin, but not, was The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen. Just like a piercing book. That's the way I describe it. It's just absolutely piercing. So I recommend that one if you're looking for just a healing book that can portray it can relate to all parts of our life, not just sexual sin. Another one that I'd recommend if you want a marriage related resource, if you're literally looking for somebody who underwent sexual trauma and then received healing, and how it played out in her marriage, I'd recommend The Impossible Marriage by Matt and Lori Krieg. It's such a beautiful book. They're a lovely Christian couple, but she was a victim of sexual trauma and then also experiences same-sex attraction. But she's married to a lovely man. And just kind of, it's their story of how they found Christ in that and how they healed. So I'd recommend that one if you want a marriage-related resource, but we can put a couple more in the show notes. But other than that, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Magdala podcast. We are excited to have you guys back in a couple weeks. And if you want more exclusive content, join us on Patreon. We're doing our Be Restored book study right now. I think we're halfway through, slow going, but because we meet once a month. But patrons support us and keep us going. So thank you, if you are a patron, for praying for us and supporting us financially. But other than that, we will catch you on the flip side. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining the conversation today on the Magdala podcast. If you want to learn more, join a support group with other women on the journey, or find more content, visit magdalaministries.org. If you want to continue to be a part of the conversation, like, subscribe, and share this podcast. But most importantly, wherever you are in the journey of healing, know that you're not alone and you don't have to hide anymore. We're excited to welcome you to the table next time. God bless.